During the course of what I will talk about very briefly is I want to give a very brief overview of what is attribution, and then I'll go into the particular case studies that I analyzed and produce some benchmark statistics from it that I think will be very much of an interest to the industry. So attribution, we've heard about that buzzword quite extensively, certainly this morning and probably elsewhere. And there is a lot of confusion out there about what attribution is, but in essence, it is it's a method of assigning credit to an outcome from a campaign. And it's across all different marketing and some non-marketing entities. So it's about assigning credit of who is responding to a campaign based off of a particular type of medium. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about attribution. And there's many different levels of attribution, and I think most of us are probably very familiar with the first primary level of attribution, which is, in essence, who are we reaching? The impressions that we get from that. And that is the basic level that probably really all of us in this room are doing today. But what we're talking about more here is really on the second level, which is now taking who we're reaching and now mapping that to an outcome for a campaign. So some key performance indicators. At the next level is multi-channel, and that's where we are really looking at who's responding to our campaigns and looking at it across all different types of media, and we use that to assign credit. Which type of media is contributing the most to a campaign success, and then we can use that to adjust our budgets accordingly. At the highest level, we use attribution really to kind of look at the larger environment, and we're not just looking at it with one particular type of medium and one particular type of campaign objective, but then also mapping that to business level objectives, which could be things like brand loyalty and lifetime value, and really understanding how what we do from a marketing perspective, and even beyond that, how that affects those outcomes. What I will be talking about today really hits that campaign ROI level, and really most companies, when they are doing attribution, aren't at the holistic or even the multi-channel level. The statistic by eMarketer is about 10% of companies are at that holistic level of attribution. I also want to provide very quickly about what do we mean by attribution and how do we get some of that technology. And I know Valentina and Brooke will be providing greater depth in that, but very briefly what we are looking at is geofencing a out-of-home property or a billboard. And from that, we use consumers' wireless phones where they opt into apps, and we're able to track when they go into that geofenced area. And we use that, of course, via GPS, Wi-Fi, or Bluetooth. And what's important about that, so we know who gets exposed to that ad, but then we compare it against those that were not exposed to that ad. So in essence, we are creating a control group, people that are not exposed to that ad, and a group that is exposed. And from there, we're able to compare the lift in whatever metric we are studying. And that metric could be ad recall, it could be store visits, it could be attitude change. And that's really what we're doing when we're looking at attribution. And we're looking at various variables to make sure that that exposed group and that control group is basically the same in terms of targeting criteria for that campaign and their behaviors while they're using their mobile phones. So that's generally at a very high level of what attribution is, and again, I know Brooke and Valentina will get into that at a much greater depth. So my particular study, the OAAA asked me to look at 45 cases provided by member companies of the association and analyze, can we get any kind of benchmark statistics from it? Can we know what the value of out-of-home advertising is to campaigns? And so looked at 45 cases. As you could see, most of them utilize billboards and more specifically even digital billboards as part of that. So those were some of those 45 cases. These cases represented a broad number of different industries that were included in those 45 cases for me to analyze. You can see the ones in red are the ones that have the heaviest emphasis within this pool of 45 cases. The stated objectives of all of these cases that I looked at, they kind of fit 3 different areas. Cognitive, which is more about memory of the campaign or knowledge about the product. Affective is your attitudinal feelings about your brand. And behavioral are either terminal behaviors, like the ultimate goal of any campaign is to get sales or something similar, or intermediate behaviors, getting somebody to go visit a store or take some other kind of behavior before making that final purchase. The ones in red are the ones where of these stated objectives, there was generally enough volume there for me to analyze to produce some benchmark statistics. And so let's get to those benchmark statistics. The very first one that I was able to look at is in the cognitive realm, so what do we know? And the one where most of these cases seem to present some data points here. And there was 5 cases, and 5 cases isn't a lot if we think about it from a statistical standpoint, but it was large enough to kind of produce an average so that we can kind of get a feel for what kind of impact out-of-home has in providing, at least in this case, ad recall. And the statistics showed us that the incremental lift for including out-of-home in a media campaign by looking at those that were exposed to out-of-home compared to those that were not, there was a range of anywhere from 13 to 66% increase in ad recall. And so you can kind of see the value that out-of-home has, at least for individuals being able to recognize components of the campaign. And a lot of that really is based upon what we already know about out-of-home having really strong reach and frequency capabilities. And I think this really proves that. From an affective or attitudinal type of perspective, there were 2 items there that we could measure. There was enough data points to really kind of produce averages, and that is purchase consideration and purchase intent. Purchase consideration is you have interest in that product and perhaps other products, but you yet haven't made the decision that you would like to purchase it. So you're considering it as one of your options. For those exposed to the out-of-home campaign, the average benchmark was anywhere from 6 to 20%. So that's above those that were not exposed to that portion of the campaign in general. Purchase intent is those that have said, we are looking to, we'll consider the product and we will be inclined to purchase it should that opportunity present itself in the future. And the average purchase intent, the incremental lift exposed by out-of-home produced anywhere from 10 to 35%. So those that were exposed to out-of-home really showed a greater level of purchase intent. And the last benchmark that I wanted to share with you is a behavioral one. And this one had the most observations to it. And I think it really speaks to the fact that with the data that we use with mobile and with geofencing, it's very easy to geofence a physical location like a store. And so we were able to look at, and these member companies were able to look at those that were exposed to out-of-home and then subsequently went into that retail environment. And the average increase of foot traffic into a store is anywhere from 50% up to 127% incremental lift for those that were exposed to the out-of-home and those that were not. So you can see that there is quite a broad impact that out-of-home can have. And that kind of brings me to some of the general implications that I would take away from this. And I think what it confirms what we already knew is that out-of-home really is a strong medium for delivering results. And this shows it by comparing those that were exposed to those that were not. The one thing I would encourage is that for those that are interested in conducting attribution type of research, that would be to include more KPIs than the 4 that I was able to draw from, because there wasn't the volume there to really understand all the other implications that an out-of-home campaign can affect from a product or a company perspective. So I think we need more studies to analyze a lot more KPIs. And I think, as I mentioned before, the retail location really showed up to be the biggest driver of a lot of the attribution types of studies, and I think you'll see that in some of the other research that will be presented today. So with that, that is what I wanted to present for the attribution case analysis study that I did. And I'd like to turn it over to Valentina, where she will also speak on a particular study that her company executed. Valentina.
Good afternoon. I head marketing for Cubic, which is a consumer insights and measurement company. And over the past few months, we have been working in partnership with the AAA on an attribution study for a leading grocery retailer. Before getting into the results, which are going to show you two parts. One, how effective the out-of-home campaign was in driving consumers to stores, but also consumer insights that the brand is then able to use for segmentation as well as future campaign planning. I just want to give you a brief background on our methodology so you have a frame of reference for the study that you're going to see. Cubic solutions are powered by our first-party anonymous location data, which we collect through our SDK, which is technology that is integrated in apps that decide to partner with us. And if users opt in to the data collection, then we are able to collect anonymous location data in a persistent way. The power of persistent, high-quality data is that it allows us to understand dwell time. We define dwell time as the time that consumers spend in store. And that is very important because it's the only way to tell apart our real visits from what we call fake visits or location pings. And that is essentially when a consumer is walking by or driving by a store but not really spending time there. And that is important because, for example, as you can see here, if you're not able to understand dwell time when you look at visits in your attribution studies, you might be miscounting visits and therefore providing very misleading reporting. The other amazing factor about persistent data collection that is high quality is that it allows you to understand the mobility patterns. And that is fundamental in out-of-home because it allows us to understand how consumers are moving and therefore if they are being exposed to a board. And this is at the core of our methodology in attribution to identify the exposed group, which, as Rick was mentioning, is the group of consumers that were exposed to the campaign. And our methodology has 3 steps. First, we identify the cone of exposure for each board. Then we understand the travel direction, which is where we use our persistent data to understand in which direction the consumers are moving. And then last but not least, by determining the roadway, we make sure that not only consumers are moving in the right direction, but they're actually in the right position and they're able to see the board. And once we identify the exposed group, then we compare it to what we call the control group, which is a group that has similar characteristics but did not see the ad. And from there, we compare behavior and provide our attribution reporting. So now, getting to the study, we measure a campaign for a leading grocery retailer. The campaign ran between January and October of last year, and we analyzed 3 key DMAs, Atlanta, Portland, and Knoxville. The campaign creative had a very specific call to action: shop online and pick up in store. And here are some of the key highlights. First of all, we saw that the out-of-home campaign was very effective in driving consumers to store for each DMA, and it was effective more than our benchmark that we see typically for grocery store campaigns. But then we went deeper, and beyond the uplift metric, we'll look at other behavioral insights. First of all, we found out that consumers took immediate action after seeing the board. In fact, almost half of the consumers exposed visited a store within 3 days. And then we looked at what are consumers doing once they get to the store, how do they behave, and we were able to let the brand know that weekends and weekday late afternoons were the most visited days and times for the consumers that saw the ad. And these kind of insights are very helpful for brands when they think about campaign planning, segmentation, because they really help them understand and round out the consumer. Another very interesting takeaway is that the ad call to action really drove action. Over 50% of the consumers spend 15 minutes or less in store, which is very different from what we see when we measure typical grocery store campaigns, because as you can imagine, you go to the grocery store, you take your time through the aisles, there's a line at the checkout. It typically takes more than 15 minutes for the majority of the consumers. Here, the behavior was very different. And then overall, because we analyzed 3 different DMAs, we saw very different behaviors, which you're going to see in the following slides, which was very helpful for the retailer because it really helps them understand how to plan future campaigns for each DMA because consumers are different and they have different patterns. Here you can see what we call visit rate. The visit rate looks at the consumers that went to the store over all of the consumers in the group, whether it's the exposed group or the control group. And here you can see the visit rate on a daily basis broken down by DMA. And the dark blue is the exposed group, the light blue is the control group, and you can see how the exposed group had a higher visit rate throughout the campaign than the control group. And typically how clients use these type of insights is also to keep an eye on the daily patterns and looking at the peaks, looking at the lows, what was going on in the market, were there other events happening, whether there are events at the brand itself or competitors or other market occurrences. Then we also analyzed at what times were consumers most receptive to the ads. And you can see here, and where it's darker is where is the times and days that generated the most visits. Very, very different behaviors by DMA. This is particularly interesting for digital out-of-home because really the time you're serving the ad can make a big difference. And then we looked at how far consumers traveled. The dark blue is the distance between the store and where the boards were. The green is the distance between the store and the consumers' homes. And the light blue is the distance between the store and the work. And again, you can see very different behaviors by DMA. For example, in Atlanta, distance between the board and the store did not play a negative effect in driving to stores, quite the opposite. And this actually tells us that the board doesn't have always to be close to the store. If the message resonates, it's going to stay with the consumer and it's going to drive action. Different behavior in Knoxville, as you can see, where proximity between work and the board to the store is actually what drove the most visits. And here we analyze then when did consumer visited the stores. And again, you can see slightly different behaviors by DMA, although you see that consistently weekends are the favorite times for consumers to visit. And last but not least, how much time did they spend in store? And this comes back to the key takeaway I was mentioning earlier. The call to action of the boards was shop online and pick up in store, and in fact, it worked. We see very low dwell times for this vertical, between 2 and 15 minutes for over 50% of the consumers. And look at this. This is the one metric that is consistent for all 3 DMAs, whereas most of the other metrics actually vary in terms of behaviors. And I would like to wrap this up just talking about putting this in the context of benchmarks. As Rick was mentioning, benchmarks are very important because if you don't know how your competitors, how your vertical, how the channel you're advertising on is performing compared to your performance, you're not exactly sure if the score you're getting is good, is great, is below average. And this is why every year at Cubic we publish our Attribution Benchmarks Report, which is based on all of the studies, all of the campaigns that we measure. And it provides segmentation by vertical, by platform, by quarter, for a variety of metrics. I'm going to give you a sneak peek here, but if you're interested in the full study, please email me at vbeezer@cubic.com, and I'm happy to send you the full study. So here you can see the breakdown for the uplift metric by vertical. All of the metrics are provided as a range. And so if your campaign scores in between that range, within that range, it has average performance with the vertical. Of course, higher, it overperforms compared to the vertical, and lower underperforms. And last but not least, the exciting slide for out-of-home, is that when we go break down effectiveness by channel, we see how effective out-of-home is in driving to store. And this is paramount because now that you have the ability to measure performance in driving to store, you can prove that your campaigns as a media owner, as an agency, are working, and you can get, as a media owner, more budget for out-of-home.
My name is Brooke Bobe. I work with TrueFactor. So we are actually a division of InMobi. InMobi is one of the world's largest advertising platforms for enterprises, and they are global. TrueFactor is actually the data division. So we actually also did an out-of-home study. We worked with a QSR in our study, and that ran from October to the end of December. So a lot of the things actually that Valentina mentioned are very complementary to what we look at in an attribution study. So here's just to kind of give you an idea. We use a combination of carrier network data and GPS data. So carrier network data will tell you things like the journey that people are taking, the routes that they're taking, and the dwell times. And the GPS can actually put them in a specific location. So in this case, it was a QSR. So we measured 57 boards, and we focused on 3 DMAs for our study. So for the purpose of this study, we are not unveiling the specific QSR that we worked with, so we have done some creative work around just showing you different sandwich shops, and I think there's a few taco examples in here. So we do just show you what we measure within our campaign. So some of the creatives I'm going to show you aren't the exact creatives, but I will just try to give you the main idea. So at an aggregate campaign performance, we saw an average conversion rate of 0.7%. And then we looked at the impression. So first of all, we're measuring, did people actually go by the billboard? So we count that as an impression. And then an attributed visit is, did they actually go into the QSR? And then from there, we are calculating our lift. So when we are providing these reports, this is just kind of an example of how we are providing it over a time series. So if I'm in the brand or the marketer, I might look at these and look at my low points and figure out if that's related to my store hours, or are there things that I can do from a social or other channel perspective to try to boost whenever I see declines. And here's just a quick snapshot of how the different markets perform. So we saw the strongest performance in the Dallas market. Birmingham did not actually perform as well, which in talking to the brand themselves, that was kind of consistent with what they were seeing in that market. The stores in the Birmingham market were in a situation where they were previously owned by a franchisee. They had some operational issues, and they were recently taken back over by the brand. This is just to give you an idea of, we broke down the top 20 performing boards across the 3 markets. If you look at this, it looks like we have one that is really definitely an outlier. And after taking a more careful look, this particular board was actually located in the parking lot of the store, which would actually make sense with why it looks like such an outlier. Same with the stores. That is the store that I was just talking about at the top. And then we also measure impressions across the number of users, which I always think is kind of interesting. It's just a great way to take a look at your data and make sure that everything is checking and balancing accordingly. Same with visits. So you want to make sure that you don't have any strange things going on in your data, which in this case, this is exactly what we would expect. Again, we have changed the creatives here. But to give you an idea, in the executive summary of our report, we looked to see which was the top performing market and board. So in this case, it was the Dallas market and store, and then the top performing creative and the bottom performing creative. So when we originally started this study, we were going to only look at creatives that had limited time offers. One of the things that was kind of interesting in this is the limited time offers were not time bound. And then the brand did make a shift towards the end where they decided to change their approach and not only do limited time offers, but they also did brand awareness campaigns. So you're going to see a mix of that, and we can talk about what the results look like. We're kind of running short on time, so I'm going to flip through these quickly. So this is more of a time series on market performance. We also did, we compared each market, so this is actually something I really love, where we can take and look at the age distribution, household information, top mosaics, and top publishers for each market. And so we are actually comparing the exposed population against like the Dallas market, for example. And so as we compare different marketplaces, you can see that that data clearly changes. So if you're a brand, one of the things that's really interesting about this data is, like in the apps, for example, it might give you some insights onto where you're going to run and spend your media. It could give you some insights into what kind of audiences that you're looking for. Quick snapshot of our board rankings and store rankings. And then we also do a lot of catchment studies. So on this particular example, we are showing you the boards and how they were exposed to home locations. So if the area is darker, that means there's a higher population of where people are traveling from their home location to cross the board and across the store. Where I think this is really interesting is if you had complementary type campaigns. So if you had direct mail, for example, you might try to target the more lightly shaded areas to see if you could get more penetration in those areas of going to your store. The other way that it's really interesting, if there was a board that was maybe further out of town, I would think about maybe hitting that billboard for my next set of campaigns and see if I could actually drive those folks to my store. I'm going to flip through these quickly. I just really put them up here to show you that the data does change from store and board location. And this, the last one was the board, but these catchment areas are particular to the store, kind of same type of view. We also went through and measured all of the different creatives and the impacts by city location. One of the things that was really interesting, like I said, we did change away from the limited time offers. This was one of the limited time offers, again, not time bound. It did perform pretty well compared to some of the other creatives. But what we did find is anytime that the creative really focused on the product itself, it performed better. In the interest of time, I'm going to flip through these very quickly. And then on this one, where the product was left with less of a focus, and it was more around like the store hours or a less clear marketing message, the creative did not perform as well. Same with this one. This was not a well-performing ad. This is just to kind of give you an idea. One of the things I do like about the way that we're presenting the data, and something that I think is personally very important for out-of-home, is giving you these kind of KPIs and metrics really takes out-of-home and puts it on the same playing field as digital media. So if you were working with agencies, or brands, then you are really speaking you are speaking their language with the same set of KPIs. Okay, so I talked a little bit about trilateration, which is how we're using carrier network data to measure. Again, that gives you dwell time. And then some of the rules that we followed when we were thinking about attribution. So one, they have to pass through the billboard, what we call viewshed, which is if you think about a billboard and you take a triangle and draw it away from the billboard, that is what we call the viewshed area. So we are making sure that wherever the billboard is actually viewable to a person. And then we look at direction traveled to make sure that the users that we are measuring actually were able to see it and it wasn't to their back or anything like that. We make sure that the user is dwelling. We took a radius of 50 meters for our study from the center of the store location. And then our dwell time is configurable, but for this particular study, we looked at anything over 5 minutes. And then anything over 90 minutes, we would throw out of our study because they were probably someone who worked at that location. Same with visitors who visited in excess of 60 times, we would also classify them as someone that worked there. Okay, so I think we're down to about 10 minutes for Q&A, so I'm going to wrap up on that note.
Thank you, Brooke. So with the remaining time that we have, I'm going to open it up to, I have some questions that I'd like to ask Brooke and Valentina, and then we'll do that for about 5 minutes, and then I'll open it up to questions from the audience if there are any questions. And I apologize for those sitting on my right. I know the podium makes either a good distraction or depending on your viewpoint.
Rick, I just want to share with the audience that the complete studies that you just saw, and actually a more in-depth version of the cubic highlights that Valentina went through are going to be available after the session ends on the OAAA website. So you'll be able to go down and pull the entire studies down and look at those, as well as Rick's analysis of the attribution case studies. And we're going to continue to build our case study library of those attribution cases. And we'll probably pull Rick back into that process moving forward to do future analyses of our results on attribution studies.
Thank you, Steve. So I guess one of the things that I was, pleasantly surprised by when I was doing the analysis and listening to both your presentations is the greater emphasis on store visits as the KPI that seems to be the dominant one looked at in attribution studies. Can you talk about whether that should be the case? Should there be other KPIs that we should be looking at in terms of attribution?
So we look at store visits as the primary KPI. That's what typically a brand or a media owner will come to us asking for as the first parameter to understand, is my ad actually driving consumers to store or not? But then we find that they also find very valuable to dig deeper into those behavioral insights, like the one I was showing about dwell time, frequency of visit, time spent in store, but also what times do they visit, because it provides deeper understanding of the consumer segments.
For me, I would say that I think store visits is very important, but I think it depends on the brand and then what they're trying to achieve. So we've worked with brands historically who, like one QSR, for example, had launched a new mobile app. And so they wanted to try to understand, what was the mobile behavior? Were they also driving customers into the store based on mobile web or on the app? And so we were able to put customers in the store, but also measure were their downloads increasing? Were we seeing more app usage associated with it? So I think it comes back to what are you trying to accomplish?
Another question that I have, based off of everything that you've all talked about today, is what are the major challenges facing brands or media owners that might be interested in conducting a study like this themselves? What do you see as the biggest obstacle to implementing it successfully?
Choosing the right partner, probably a very big one, because you want to make sure that you're working with the right company. I see this as twofold. On one end, you have the data quality and the ability to actually provide insights that are really telling you the story, and the other side is privacy. It's very important that you choose a partner that has a future-forward privacy approach so that you are ready for what's to come with CCPA next year and all of the regulation that has been talked about. And this can be a hurdle, but there are partners out there like Cubic that can provide that kind of support and partnerships.
I actually totally agree with you. So I think it comes down to quality of the data, scale of the data, ability to have historical data depending on what you're trying to study. And then I think, if you have to make sure that your data partners understand privacy, that they're able to track that consent, and that you feel comfortable with their answer, I would be looking at all those parameters.
Thank you, and I promise I didn't set you guys up to mention your own firms, but certainly good. I guess the last question before I open it up for wider audience questions is, what do you think is next in terms of attribution research? Where is it going? What should we expect or look forward to in terms of attribution and out-of-home?
What we hear a lot from our clients is cross-channel measurement. You touched upon it in your presentation, understanding incremental lift and how are the different channels playing together. Actually, with our partner, Clear Channel, we have measured a number of campaigns where we look at performance of out-of-home alone and then how you can amplify the effectiveness in drive into store when you combine out-of-home with mobile retargeting. And that works really well. And I see evolution towards a true cross-channel measurement and incremental lift, including TV, including digital, and all of the channels.
Yeah, I think that definitely cross-channel is a big part of it. I would say that I've been working in somewhere touching advertising for at least 10 years, and every year I feel like we just go further and further down the funnel. So I think that continues to happen where everyone's wanting like more and more insight and more closing of the loop. So I see us getting into like micro-targeting. I see more dynamic ads. I see more custom targeting towards users who are maybe approaching an ad. I mean, I think there's just so many places that it can go. They're really interesting.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask one of our panelists?
I had a question for you on the second case study you did for the supermarket chain.
Yeah.
Was that the first time that they were advertising on a billboard?
No.
They've been a long, they're in our top 50 out-of-home advertisers. They've been a long time user of the media. But I should also add that for both of the advertisers that the case studies covered, they used only printed out-of-home. There was no digital in the campaign.
And then given the results of that, which seem really good, have you seen or do you know if they've spent more money in out-of-home because of it?
Do you know, Steve?
So Kroger actually is the grocer, and they're doing a lot of internal work right now that's very technology driven, but they're hoping that they're going to be able to eventually share some little shopper metrics with us. So we might have a supplemental release on that Kroger study that's going to show little shopper impact of those that were exposed to the campaign. But we don't know definitively that we're going to get that. And then as far as the QSR goes, their agency who we partnered with directly on the program, they've already come back and shared how the information is really helpful for them in terms of giving them additional insights about better ways to plan and execute out of home to drive even better performance in their stores. So initially we think that, yeah, both of these studies have had a really positive impact. But I know a lot of the media companies that are in the room today have been doing a lot of these studies for their advertisers. And I think, what the cubic benchmark report shows is that out-of-home actually outperforms some of our digital competitors in terms of being able to create positive lift in store visitation. So I think there's a really great story growing here for out-of-home. I think the next component which Rick talked about is multi-point attribution. Out-of-home creates and engages with consumers in really powerful ways, but at the bottom of the funnel, a lot of times attribution goes to search or digital media online. And so the more that we're able to prove out multi-point and get more into that, I think that's going to be an even greater value to our industry.
And if I may add, a number of partners of ours actually do use attribution to get more budget. I was talking to a media partner a couple weeks ago, and he was saying how he sees attribution as a cash register instead of a cost center. And that is because it helps you win more budget once you're able to prove that what you're doing actually works.
Thank you.
This question's to whoever can answer it, and if it's not answerable, just tell me that. So I'm assuming we can't track all the phones, but you are tracking an individual phone that passed by an individual billboard into an individual store? And if that's true, are you able to track all phones or just those that Verizon shares the data with you or a particular app on the phone shares the data with you?
So, I'll speak for Quebec. We're able to analyze patterns of the users that opted in to the data collection for us. So our panel is not all of the users in the United States. It's a very vast panel, though. And
Sorry, they opted in specifically to your...
to the apps that, yes, we have a very clear opt-in consent flow, and so we work with the apps where our technology is integrated in, and to make sure that the consent is very clear and they know that they're opting into the data being collected for uses such as advertising and research.
They didn't opt into Kroger and Hamburgers.
No, it's not related to the retailer, no.
So we clearly see that there is a positive lift. It's great. But my question is, we see also there's like quite difference in lift between campaigns or between industries. Do we understand why there are differences in lift? And what would be the variable driving 12% or 20 or 30 or 40%?
So it's multiple types of differences. One is the industry, the vertical you're in. Consumer behaviors change. Your purchase behavior for a car is very different from a grocery store or a convenience store, so that typically plays a role. Creative plays a big role. In the benchmarks report that we just released, differently from last year, we had to widen some of the windows for the ranges for uplift because we saw results that were kind of like split up, like a big group of campaigns that were performing at a certain level and another group that was performing at a much higher level. And so in order to provide a benchmark that would be statistically significant, we had to widen the range. Creative plays a big factor. And then, economic conditions also play a role. Also, when we look at the changes year over year and specific by industry, there are some industries that are verticals that are suffering more than others. And so there's all of these factors. But if you are interested in the study, we actually provide for each vertical some insight into what we think that these changes are due to.
So I think you saw in our study that creative did play an impact. We had one market that had operational issues at their stores, so that had an impact. We studied another market that was very mature, so all of these factors contribute to it.
I think, yeah, just to expand on that a little bit more about the QSR, what Brooke just highlighted, I think it's really important to understand the entire landscape. So you're just looking at the media results, but the agency came back to us and gave us this additional detail about the Birmingham market in particular, that there were legacy issues there, and they were actually really pleased with the lift that the campaign showed there. But just as she showed, and I think this is a really important consideration for everybody that wants to get into this work, is making sure that the campaign KPIs that the agency or advertiser want to measure are supported by the out-of-home campaign, because otherwise it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. And we let the QSR proceed with including those additional creatives in the final report. But again, as limited time offers, they performed higher. The directional signage performed pretty well too. The general branding message did perform as well. And I don't think any of the application measurement companies here today would necessarily endorse a pure branding message as the best type of creative to look at for an attribution study. We're really going to look at a call to action.
I think that's...
One simple question. How do you define lift? What is lift?
So for us uplift, we look at the exposed group and we compare the behavior to the control group and see how effective was the ad in driving to stores based on how many more visits and percentage points the exposed group had to stores as compared to the control group.
But are you talking about the behavior of going to a store?
Yeah.
So you don't know what they bought in the store?
No, we focus on visits.
So
Yes.
Lift visit.
Visit lift, yes. And
Okay, so the arbitrage between not visiting and visiting 10% would be the lift number?
Yeah.
A visit?
Exactly.
Okay, but you don't know what they bought or what they didn't buy? Or how
No,
much
we
they
focus
bought?
on visit, but what we do with a number of clients, and Steve was mentioning is happening in this case study as well, is that then the client looks at their transaction data and matches it up to our insights, and then they're able to close the loop between visits and actual transaction.
They can close the loop? Is that-
Yes, same for us. So we also were using strictly location data in this case. The QSR that we worked with did provide sales data, so we could look at that, but we were not using purchase data.
But you weren't able to connect the cell phone to the purchase data because you wouldn't know that, right?
We did not in this study. The QSR provided the sales data.
Right, but they don't know the phone. They can't. No one's buying with their phone, right? You know, in other words, there's no way they're connecting the purchase data with the phone that you're tracking, right? There's still a gap.
With the grocer case study, because they do have a loyal shopper program, and it is all tied back to device ID, that's what they have the ability now to go back and do based on the data that they were fed by QBIC. So they can go in and look at what additional behaviors those individual loyal shoppers took that were exposed to the out-of-home campaign versus those that did not. So they do have internally the ability to do what you're asking. And they may end up sharing some of that with us, but we don't know where it's going to occur. If they do, we'll release that. Yeah. And sorry, Rick, we have to wrap up.
Yes. I was just going to say the same thing. Thank you all for.